Also, one of the reasons for white to start looking for improvements in bishop f4 lines or in Carlsbad structures was the introduction of system, so-called Tartakov-Makegonov-Banderevsky system, which is characterized by black's immediate attempt to play b6 and bishop b7, so without even developing knight from ba. And normally in this position, you know, it was after move 4, knight f3, knight f6, or bishop e7. It just depends on what moves order is being used, bringing bishop on e7 first or knight on f6. White plays bishop g5, and now black should start with h6 or castle followed by h6, because for all these lines, pawn on h6 plays an important role. So it saves black a tempo, potential tempo, if white bishop comes on d3 and white queen comes on c2, thus attacking pawn on h7, and also winning time for putting pressure on c file. So we could see it's an example after h6, bishop h4, castle e3, b6, and here is just, you know, let me remind you, this is a tabi of this line, Tartakov-Makegonov-Banderevsky, probably the most celebrated line in the history of Queen's Gambit decline, played by many great players. It's considered to be very modern. It was regularly played by Boris Spassky. Then it was regularly played by Anatoly Karpov. It was also regularly employed by myself, playing Karpov both with white and black. It was played by Nigel Short, and among many other players, and I think we can hardly find a player who never tried this line once in his life. And of course, Vladimir Kramnik, who proved to be a big fan and a knowledgeable fan of Queen's Gambit, also on both sides of this eternal equation. So in one of the first attempts to gain an advantage, white always tried to play cd5, and now the whole idea is just not to play ed5. And this position, I have to admit, occurred a few times in my match with Belyavsky, for instance. It was a reverse moves order. Belyavsky actually played b6 in the Carlsbad variation, trying to avoid main line with c6. And then after bishop b7, bishop d3, bishop b7, castle c5, knight e5, white gained advantage in both lines, after knight c6 and after knight d7. So eventually Belyavsky decided to avoid this line, and I think it disappeared eventually from serious practice. So after cd5, black plays knight takes d5. Exchanging the pieces, you can see some similarities with the systems introduced by Lasker and Capablanca, but of course now black is hoping to play c7, c5. That's the main idea. And after bishop takes e7, queen e7, knight d5, e d5, it's quite important the pawn is ready in h6, so bishop d3, queen c2 doesn't work. And eventually after rook c1, for instance, black plays bishop e6. That's a better location for the bishop. Here is well located. It's opens c8 square for the rook and preparing c5. So one of the attempts for white to play for advantage is queen a4, and after c5 to play queen a3, rook c8, and here Fischer played bishop b5 against Spassky in their famous match in Reykjavik in 1972, and Spassky reacted quite poorly, and in fact there was a mystery why he didn't use one of the openings ideas prepared for the match by him and Geller, which Geller later used against Timon, winning a very nice game. So queen b7, just not only escaping from the pin that was still in place, but also preparing advanced c5, c4, cutting the bishop on b5. So, and after d takes c5, bc5, rook c5, exchange of the rooks, knight a6. Suddenly white has a choice of either going in the endgame after queen c6, but then exchange of white couldn't go on c6 because exchange on c6 and then rook c8, and after bishop a4, white could go, black could go on c1, and then maybe rook b1, and this is it's having no problems at all. Or as Timon played, bishop takes a6, queen takes a6. White has an extra pawn, but the king, white's king, is so poorly located, so it can't castle. And eventually, the game ended with a very nice victory for Geller, who used this enduring factor and created decisive attack eventually. So white couldn't prove anything in this line, so it proved to be quite innocent. And then there were numerous attempts here to play rook c1 and then bishop e2, or to play bishop d3, bishop b7 and castle, and then simply develop pieces like queen e2. But after c5, black always managed to equalize. So white even tried bishop queen b3. That's one of the Pologaevsky's favorite line. Bishop b7, exchanging on f6, exchanging on d5, and playing rook d1, thus preventing c7, c5, and then trying to bring bishop on d3, then bishop on b1, and potentially using using this diagonal, having queen on c2, or preparing e3, e4. If black just develops pieces innocently, then white at one point could actually prepare e3, e4, having strong pressure in the center. Ironically, after rook d1, rook e8, bishop d3, black still managed to play c5. After dc5, knight bd7, and that's one of the lines I tested both with black and white. Once I played against Belyavsky in 1978, my first national championship. I had gained a little advantage after c6 and queen a3, but it's proved to be inefficient in the future games. So c5 was enough to equalize, because after dc5, knight d7, all attempts to take on b6 could fail due to d4 and then knight c5, and black had very, very good position due to the advance and breakthrough in the center. So white even tried to play a3. That was another ingenious idea of Viktor Korchnoi, just waiting for black to play c6, and a3 is a very useful move after the c5 breakthrough, and then to play bishop d3, then to bring a bishop on b1, and potentially even on a2 after a breakthrough e4 in the center. That was first introduced by Korchnoi playing in London against me, game 10, our semi-final match, and then turned to be quite popular, played in a number of games, and it also was played by Kramnik in our classical segment of the match in Moscow in 2001. So as you could see, some names in this position are mentioned on both sides of the picture. You can have Karpov playing black, Karpov playing white, Kasparov playing black, Kasparov playing white, Kramnik playing both colors. So probably with the exception of Viktor Korchnoi, and Nigel Short, you could have those two players belong to opposite sides. Korchnoi always played this position with white, Short always played with black. Many players, or most of the players, try this position with both colors. It just shows the enormous richness of this position and a recognition of the fact that the position, this opening offers great opportunities to attack and defend, and to display one's positional skills to outplay an opponent. After e3, b6, one of the most popular lines is just to play bishop e2. It was also introduced, I think, eventually by Viktor Korchnoi. Bishop b7, exchange on f6, cd5, ed5, and then either castle or even playing b4 immediately. So in both cases, it could reach the position after c5, takes on c5, rook b1, bishop c6, castle, knight d7, bishop b5, queen c7. That's another tabe, played many times in my matches with Karpov. White always gained slight plus, never won a single game. So in fact, I probably was close a couple of times of increasing my advantage, but never managed to transform it in something serious. While Karpov played it a couple of times, he played it with white, but it was always and quite an easy draw for me. After castle Black could play knight d7, hoping for the same b4 c5 line, but in fact many players like Spassky, now Short, and Yusupov, they prefer to play c6. Also we can mention Putin and Vaganian, and after b4 either playing rook e8 or even playing a5, b5 and c5. So and then the position that occurs it's extremely complicated because both sides have their positional advantages, their positional pluses, and they could hope for increasing or improving their position and to capitalize on the strengths of one's position.